Welcome, Tamenwai Sanel Bar Ein Decoded. Today we're going to expose a single neuroscience trick that can rewire your brain in hours, not months. If you want a simple, science-backed protocol to replace a limiting belief, weaken an unwanted habit, or accelerate a new skill, listen closely because the next may change how you approach learning and unlearning for the rest of your life. When we talk about the brain's capacity for change, most people think in terms of long training cycles, repeated practice, and slow, incremental adaptation. But one of the most powerful and least understood mechanisms of neural change happens not during repetition, but during a brief and very specific biological window called Waller's reconsolidation. This window doesn't just allow information to be stored, it allows old information to be updated. Once you understand how it works, you can use it to make targeted, lasting changes to habits, fears, skills, and thought patterns in a fraction of the time most people expect. The process begins with something counterintuitive. A memory is not fixed. When you recall a memory or re-engage with a learned behavior, you're not just replaying it, you're unlocking it. The moment you bring that memory into active awareness, the neural circuits that store it become temporarily destabilized. They loosen. For a short period, the chemical and structural bonds that keep that memory rigid open up. This is not a weakness of the system. It's a design feature that allows the brain to remain adaptive. The world changes, and the brain needs a way to update old predictions so it can respond effectively to new conditions. But here's the critical point: reactivation alone doesn't automatically lead to change. Once a memory is open, the brain asks a silent question. Why is the old prediction still valid? If the answer is yes, the memory simply restabilizes, often becoming even stronger. To trigger reconsolidation, the process that allows meaningful rewiring, there must be a mismatch between what the brain expects and what actually happens. This mismatch, often called a prediction error, is what signals the brain that its old model is incomplete or outdated. It's the biological equivalent of highlighting a sentence and saying, "Eat it, this now." This prediction error doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be significant enough for the nervous system to register that something doesn't align with the established memory. In the context of fear, it might mean entering a situation that usually triggers anxiety and discovering that the feared outcome does not occur. In the context of learning a skill, it could be recognizing an error pattern, then experiencing a better technique that contradicts the old motor program. The mismatch is the key that unlocks the door. Without it, the memory seals unchanged. Once this window is open, the brain becomes highly plastic. Neuromodulators, chemicals like dopamine, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine rise in response to novelty, surprise, and focused attention. These neuromodulators act like biochemical amplifiers. They flag the memory trace as something that needs updating and provide the cellular environment required for synaptic change. This is where the real rewiring occurs. New information presented during this period doesn't simply sit alongside the old memory. It becomes woven into the memory itself. The brain doesn't store the old and new versions separately. It updates the original file. This window, however, is time-sensitive. The labile period, the phase when a memory is soft and changeable, typically lasts a few hours. That means what you do in the immediate aftermath of reactivation matters enormously. If you reactivate a fear memory and then experience safety, the fear trace weakens. If you reactivate a bad habit but immediately engage in a different behavior with a strong reward signal, the habit loop begins to update. If you recall a limiting belief and then practice a new behavior that contradicts it, the belief starts losing its grip. But if you reactivate a memory, trigger the mismatch, and then flood yourself with the old cues again uncritically, the system can reconsolidate the very pattern you're trying to change. The reconsolidation window also benefits profoundly from sleep. During sleep, especially deep sleep and REM sleep, the brain performs the final stabilization. Protein synthesis, neural pruning, and circuit strengthening occur in ways that lock in the updated memory. This is why the most powerful updates often reveal themselves the next day, not in the moment. The change can feel surprisingly effortless, not because the process was easy, but because the brain did the heavy lifting in the background. The biggest mistake people make is assuming that reconsolidation requires intense emotional suffering or massive behavioral change. It doesn't. The process is precise, not overwhelming. It's about timing, not brute force. A brief reactivation, a well-placed mismatch, and a short period of focused corrective experience are often enough to initiate lasting rewiring. The brain is eager to update itself, You simply have to give it the right opportunity. A prediction error is one of the most powerful levers for changing the brain, yet most people move through life without ever deliberately using it. The nervous system is constantly generating predictions about what will happen next, how sensations should feel, what actions will lead to which outcomes, and how other people will respond. These predictions are based on past experience, encoded as neural patterns that guide perception and behavior. When the world matches those predictions, the brain gets silent confirmation that its internal model is accurate. But when reality diverges from expectation, even slightly, the brain lights up. That spark of surprise is a biological signal that says, update the model. This is prediction error, and it is the catalyst for rewriting deeply ingrained patterns. To understand why prediction error is so effective, it helps to appreciate the brain's design. The brain does not passively record the world, it actively anticipates it. Every memory you have, every habit you've built, every emotional reflex you've reinforced is a template the brain uses to save energy and respond quickly. But because these templates are efficient, they become rigid. They resist change unless the brain encounters evidence that the template is flawed. That evidence is created through a mismatch between what is expected and what happens. The mismatch doesn't need to be dramatic or intense. It just needs to be clear enough for the nervous system to register that its assumptions are inaccurate. This is why change rarely happens by simply telling yourself to think differently or behave differently. If the new behavior doesn't contradict the old prediction in a meaningful way, the brain dismisses it and defaults to the familiar pattern. But when the new experience violates expectation, even in a small yet undeniable way, the brain has no choice but to reconsider the old wiring. Consider fear learning. If someone has a conditioned fear response to a certain situation, the prediction is danger. When they enter that situation and nothing dangerous happens, the experience contradicts the stored memory. That mismatch, especially when paired with a calm physiological state, signals the amygdala and related circuits that the fear template is outdated. Over repeated exposures within the reconsolidation window, the prediction updates from danger to safe. What's striking is how quickly these updates can occur when the mismatch is clear and the nervous system is paying attention. The same principle applies to habits. A habit is the brain predicting that a certain cue will lead to a particular reward or outcome. If the cue occurs and the behavior does not produce the expected reward, the mismatch weakens the habit loop. Alternatively, if a new behavior produces a better or more rewarding outcome than the old one, the brain begins shifting its prediction toward the new pattern. Again, the crucial element is not repetition alone, but the mismatch between expectation and outcome. In the realm of skill acquisition, prediction errors are essential. When you attempt a movement and feel it go wrong, that error signal, the moment your brain recognizes the gap between intended and actual movement, triggers neural mechanisms that refine the motor program. Without prediction error, skill doesn't improve. In fact, elite performers deliberately seek situations that generate small, manageable mismatches because these moments accelerate learning far more than smooth, error-free practice. But creating a prediction error intentionally requires precision. If the mismatch is too small or too subtle, the brain might not register it. If it's too large or too overwhelming, the brain can revert to defensive patterns, reinforcing old wiring instead of updating it. The ideal mismatch sits in the middle zone, unexpected enough to challenge the old model, safe enough for the brain to remain open and attentive. Another key component is attention. Prediction error has its strongest effect when the person is fully aware of the mismatch. If the mismatch happens without conscious recognition, the updating signal is weaker. This is why it's valuable to take a moment to mentally label the surprise, "That's not what I expected." The simple act of acknowledging the mismatch amplifies neuromodulators like dopamine and noradrenaline, which enhance plasticity and signal the brain that change is relevant. What makes prediction error especially powerful is that it doesn't just modify surface-level behavior. It targets the underlying neural architecture. Instead of layering new habits on top of old ones, it restructures the circuits themselves. The brain becomes more efficient, more accurate, and more adaptive. It stops wasting energy on outdated assumptions and begins aligning itself with reality instead of memory. When used intentionally, prediction error becomes a tool for reshaping identity, behavior, and emotional reflexes with remarkable speed. Ultimately, creating a mismatch is not about forcing massive change. It's about carefully engineering small, Precise surprises that give the brain permission to rewrite old patterns. When done within the reconsolidation window, these surprises don't just teach the brain something new. They transform what the brain believes to be true. The ability to change the brain quickly and effectively depends far more on a state than most people realize. You can have the right tools, the right protocol, and the right intention, but if your brain is not in the correct neuromodulatory state, the amount of plasticity you generate will be minimal. Neuromodulators. Chemicals like dopamine, noradrenaline, acetylcholine, and serotonin are the levers that shift the brain from passive recording into active rewiring. They determine whether the brain is in a mode of exploration, focused engagement, deep learning, or calm consolidation. When you understand how these systems operate, you can begin to intentionally move your brain into the ideal state for rapid change. Neuromodulators are not just feel good or stress chemicals. They set the gain on neural circuits. They decide how sensitive synapses are to experience, how quickly neurons fire, and how strongly new patterns get encoded. When dopamine levels rise because you're motivated or anticipating reward, the brain becomes primed to link action with outcome. This is why learning accelerates when you care about what you're learning. Dopamine assigns value to certain experiences and essentially tells the brain, this matters. Remember it. Without dopamine, even the most intentional practice sessions can feel flat and ineffective. Noradrenaline, released from the locus coeruleus, is the signal of alertness. It's what heightens focus, sharpens attention, and prepares the brain to respond to challenges. When noradrenaline is too high, you feel overwhelmed or anxious. When it's too low, you feel dull, unfocused, and unmotivated. The sweet spot, a moderate, steady level of arousal, is where plasticity thrives. This is the zone where you feel engaged, slightly pushed, but not panicked. In this state, the brain is highly receptive to new information and to updating old circuits. Acetylcholine is another key player. It acts like a spotlight, narrowing attention onto specific sensory inputs or components of a task. When acetylcholine is elevated, the nervous system tunes out irrelevant noise and zooms in on what's important. This precision is crucial during the correction phase of learning. If dopamine tells the brain, remember this, acetylcholine tells it what to remember. It marks the specific neural pathways that need strengthening or weakening. When you combine these neuromodulators, dopamine for motivation, noradrenaline for alertness, acetylcholine for focus, you create a neurochemical environment that is intensely plastic. This is the state in which the brain is most willing to modify its circuits. The key is learning how to elicit this state deliberately. One reliable way to optimize neuromodulators is to engage in short bursts of physical activity. A few minutes of high-intensity movement, sprinting in place, fast cycling, or rapid burpees can elevate noradrenaline and dopamine in a controlled, useful way. The reason this works is that physical exertion signals the brain that something important is happening. It raises arousal just enough to push you into the optimal alert, but not overwhelmed zone. When followed immediately by focused learning or corrective practice, this heightened neuromodulatory state dramatically enhances plasticity. Another strategy is to tap into meaningful goals or intrinsic motivation before learning. Visualizing a desired outcome, thinking about why a behavior matters, or recalling moments of success can increase dopamine levels naturally. This creates a psychological and neurochemical readiness that primes the brain for change. It's not positive thinking. It's using your internal reward system to flag upcoming experiences as important. Breathing techniques also play a role. Fast physiological sighs or controlled hyperventilation can quickly increase carbon dioxide and alertness, shifting noradrenaline levels upward. Slow, extended exhalations can bring the system back down if arousal becomes too high. The ability to modulate your autonomic state on demand allows you to stay inside the optimal zone for learning. Novelty is another neuromodulatory trigger. The brain is wired to respond strongly to new environments, new tools, new contexts. Even small changes, practicing a skill in a different room, using a new cue, or altering your posture, can increase dopamine and acetylcholine by signaling that the situation is unexpected and therefore worth paying attention to. When novelty combines with intention, the brain shifts rapidly into a learning-ready mode. Once you've induced this plasticity state, the next step is working through the corrective learning or updated behavior with deep focus. This is where acetylcholine helps you lock onto the exact aspect of the behavior or memory you want to rewrite. Any distraction during this phase reduces the neuromodulatory effect and weakens the learning signal. Finally, after the high arousal learning period, the brain needs the opposite state, calm. Serotonin, heavy states, rest, and especially sleep help consolidate the changes made during the neuromodulatory peak. The real rewiring happens when the brain transitions from effort to rest. The ability to modulate these neurochemicals intentionally is one of the most powerful tools you have for shaping your own brain. When you understand what drives them, how they interact, and when to activate or quiet them, you gain access to a biological mechanism capable of accelerating change far beyond what repetition alone can produce. Once the brain has entered a state of plasticity, once a memory has been reactivated, a prediction error has occurred, and neuromodulators have been elevated, what you do next determines whether the change becomes permanent or dissolves back into old wiring. Plasticity is not the same as consolidation. Plasticity is the opening of the door. Consolidation is the process of walking through it and closing it behind you so the change sticks. Most people trigger plasticity but sabotage consolidation because they don't understand the importance of timing, follow up, and rest. The window after a learning or updating session is just as biologically critical as the session itself. When a memory or behavior has been destabilized, it enters a fragile state. The brain is essentially holding the old pattern in one hand and the new information in the other. Over the next few hours, it must decide how to merge them. That decision is shaped entirely by what you expose your brain to during the consolidation window. If you immediately flood your mind with distractions, stress, contradictory experiences, or the old habit you're trying to overwrite, the brain will lean back toward the familiar pattern. Not because the new information was weak, but because consolidation was interrupted. One of the most powerful things you can do in this phase is to reduce competing inputs. The nervous system needs a degree of calm and stability to synthesize proteins, alter synaptic strengths, and reorganize neural circuits. After the learning or mismatch session, avoid intense multitasking, emotional conflict, or jumping into environments loaded with old cues. Remaining in a low stimulation state for even 30-60 minutes can dramatically improve consolidation. This doesn't mean you must sit still. Light, low-stress activity is fine. But anything that reactivates the old pattern prematurely can blunt the update. Another key factor is repetition, but not the kind people usually think of. You don't want to repeat the entire learning session over and over. Instead, you want brief, spaced reviews of the new pattern, the updated information, or the corrected belief. Short, low-intensity re-engagement signal to the brain that the new wiring is relevant across different time points. This is where the concept of spacing comes in. Neuroscience consistently shows that information repeated across time, with breaks in between, consolidates far more effectively than information crammed into one block. The brain interprets spaced signals as more meaningful and worthy of long-term storage. Timing also matters in relation to sleep. Sleep is the biological anchor of consolidation. During slow wave sleep, the brain replays and strengthens the updated circuits, essentially rehearsing the new wiring without your awareness. During REM sleep, emotional tagging and integration occur, linking the updated memory to other networks and weakening unnecessary associations. This is why it's common to wake up the next day and feel that the new skill is smoother, the fear is less potent, or the new habit feels more natural. The brain did the work for you overnight because you gave it something coherent and uncluttered to consolidate. There is also a critical window within the first 3 to 5 hours after the learning update session. During this period, the memory trace is still labile. Anything that contradicts or competes with the new information can disrupt the consolidation process. For example, if you are updating a fear memory, exposing yourself to intense stress or unsafe conditions shortly after the session may unintentionally reconsolidate some elements of the fear. If you are updating a skill, practicing the incorrect version during this window may blend the old errors back into the new wiring. Respecting this early phase is essential for ensuring the new pattern stabilizes cleanly. The follow-up period is also shaped by reward and internal state. If you attach a sense of meaning, positive expectation, or reward to the updated memory, even something as small as acknowledging your progress, dopamine is released. Dopamine not only enhances learning during the plasticity phase, but also strengthens consolidation afterward. The brain prioritizes patterns associated with reward because they signal that the new behavior or belief is beneficial. This reward doesn't need to be external. A simple sense of satisfaction or internal recognition can have a powerful neuromodulatory effect. Finally, consolidation is not a single event, but a cycle. Over the next 24 hours, And especially across several nights of sleep, the brain continues to refine the updated wiring. Small revisits to the new behavior paired with consistent sleep help reinforce the change. You don't need intensity. You need consistency and clean signals. Over time, the updated pattern becomes the default, not because you forced it, but because you respected the biological rhythms that govern how the brain stabilizes change. The art of consolidation lies in honoring the timing. The brain is always ready to change, but it changes most effectively when you allow plasticity to be followed by quiet, spaced reinforcement and restorative sleep. When you understand this rhythm, you're no longer fighting your brain, you're working with it. So here is the practical takeaway. The brain gives you a short, powerful window, a few hours, in which it is willing to rewrite itself. You don't always need longer practice. You need the right practice at the right time in the right brain state. Learn to reactivate, surprise the brain, give it corrective data, and then protect the following hours and night. Use that sequence, and you will see changes happen faster than you thought possible. Thank you for watching BRAIM Decoded. If you want a printable, step-by-step protocol you can use tomorrow morning, or a short guided script to safely create a prediction error for performance or habit change, tell me in the comments and I'll upload it. Rewire smart, rewire fast. See you next time.